The Harry Potter films changed a lot from the books. Some storylines were completely cut, some scenes were rearranged, certain characters were completely rewritten. There's one character whose film portrayal fundamentally changed the entire story, and it's the one person who was supposed to be the wisest, calmest figure in the wizarding world.
Harry, you put your name in a goblet of fire.
That infamous scene might be the most obvious example, but it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how wrong the films got Dumbledore's character. So in this video, I will break down the massive differences between book Dumbledore and film Dumbledore, and why these changes matter so much more than you might think. If there's one word that describes Dumbledore in the books, it's calm. No matter what chaos is unfolding around him, Dumbledore remains this steady, unshakable presence. Even when he's angry, it's described as a cold fury, not shouting or raging, something seemingly more controlled, and in my opinion, more intimidating. Take this quote from the Goblet of Fire when Dumbledore discovers that Barty Crouch Jr. has been posing as Mad-Eye Moody all year. There was no benign smile upon Dumbledore's face. No twinkle in the eye behind the spectacles. There was cold fury in every line of the ancient face. A sense of power radiated from Dumbledore as though he were giving off burning heat. And that's book Dumbledore, right? Powerful, yes, but controlled. He doesn't shout things to be intimidating. His mere presence is intimidating enough. Film Dumbledore is like a completely different character. He doesn't just get angry, he explodes. He grabs students, he yells, he seems constantly on edge, like he's barely keeping it together. In the movies, Dumbledore doesn't just walk into a room, he storms in. He doesn't just speak, he often barks orders. When Trelawney is being sacked by Umbridge, film Dumbledore just awkwardly shouts at the gathered students.
But you all have studying to do.
And it's just something that book Dumbledore would never do. And even in calmer moments, film Dumbledore sort of lacks that serene, slightly eccentric quality that made the book character so endearing. You see, book Dumbledore is a man who admits to reading Muggle knitting patterns. He talks about his fondness for chamber music and hot chocolate. He's quirky and whimsical in a way that makes his serious moments all the more powerful by contrast. But film Dumbledore, especially after Michael Gambon took over, is just angry a lot. Even when he's being kind, there still feels like this underlying intensity that feels completely at odds with how the character was written. And the shift in personality doesn't just change Dumbledore, it changes how we view the entire wizarding world. Because in the books, Dumbledore's calmness makes us feel safe. If he's not worried, then maybe things aren't as dire as they seem. But film Dumbledore kind of offers no such comfort. If even he is panicking, what hope does anybody else have? There's often arguments about whether Richard Harris's Dumbledore from the first couple of films could appropriately portray Dumbledore from the later books when things get more intense. And I'll come on to the differences between the actors later in the video. But I actually think the difference in intensity largely comes from the films and how Gambon portrayed Dumbledore. Like, don't get me wrong, there are moments of intensity, but in the books, Dumbledore always seems in control, save for when he drinks the potion in the cave. But by making Dumbledore more aggressive, confronting Harry about the Goblet of Fire, dueling Voldemort in the Order of the Phoenix, there are these moments where Dumbledore should feel in control. But in the films, by making him more aggressive and more volatile, he feels less confident. And suddenly the films have altered the emotional foundation of the story. And they kind of took away, for me, one of the most refreshing aspects of the character, which is the fact that this immensely powerful wizard was also kind and patient and, yes, a little bit weird. But in trying to make him more dramatic, they kind of made him much less interesting. I think a big criticism of the films in general is that they lose a lot of the whimsical nature of the wizarding world, particularly from book 3 onwards. And I understand for a lot of the plot they have to get more intense and more dark. But Dumbledore is a fundamentally whimsical character. Despite being the most powerful wizard alive and carrying the weight of the wizarding world on his shoulders, he kind of maintains this childlike delight in a world of magic around him. Like his first appearance in The Philosopher's Stone, McGonagall has been waiting all day as a cat, deeply concerned about the Potters' deaths and what Voldemort's disappearance means for the wizarding world. And what's Dumbledore's first action? He pulls out this peculiar silver device and starts to click it to extinguish streetlights. And it's almost playful from him. And his first line is, "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall," with a knowing smile, as if they just bumped into each other at a tea party. Rather than the day after the Potters had been murdered and Voldemort had been defeated, he's just a bit playful, right? And this playfulness runs through everything book Dumbledore does. He announces nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak at the start of term feast. He admits to seeing a thick pair of woolen socks when he looks in the mirror of Erised, though granted he's probably lying. He even confesses to be quite fond of the Bertie Bott's every flavoured beans. And these aren't just throwaway moments, they are central to who Dumbledore is. He's somebody who finds joy and beauty in the small things, despite having seen the darkest side of humanity. He's whimsical because he chooses to be, because he knows how important it is to maintain a sense of wonder in a world that can be cruel. But I just feel like in the films, this aspect of his character is almost completely erased. Like, Richard Harris captured some of Dumbledore's gentle humour in the first two films, but after Michael Gambon took over, any sense of whimsy kind of vanished. And I'm not saying it's Michael Gambon's fault, it could be because of the director or the writing. The producers might have decided they wanted the films to go in a darker, more mature direction. But Gambon became this Dumbledore who was stern and serious and perpetually stressed. It felt like the twinkle in his eye had been replaced with a furrowed brow. The gentle smile replaced by this tight-lipped grimace. And like I say, it's not just Gambon or Dumbledore's character. The films as a whole got darker at this point, and so that all seemed to compound the changes to Dumbledore's character. Chris Columbus departed, the plot got a little bit more intense. Although, did they? The Chamber of Secrets is still quite intense. It's about trying to murder Muggleborns all year. Either way, all of these things together seem to compound the changes to Dumbledore's character. The filmmakers seem to have decided that a powerful wizard can't also be silly or eccentric. They traded Dumbledore's delightful oddness for a more conventional portrayal of wisdom and authority. But in doing so, it felt like they lost something essential about the character. We never see Dumbledore humming to himself as he walks the halls. We never see him offering students lemon drops or making amusing observations about knitting patterns. And I don't want to be overdramatic, but it feels like losing this whimsical side of Dumbledore doesn't just make him less fun, it makes him less complex. Like, his eccentric side exists in perfect balance with his power and his wisdom in the books. And it kind of humanizes him, right? It makes his serious moments more impactful by contrast. And it reminds us that even in trying times, there is still room for joy and silliness. In dark times, Dumbledore chooses to turn on the light. But by stripping away those essential parts of his personality, the films just gave us a Dumbledore who was a bit more bleak, less nuanced, and kind of less magical than the book version of Dumbledore. A character who embodied the wonder of the wizarding world sort of just became another stern old man with a long beard. Now, I think one of the most glaring differences between book Dumbledore and film Dumbledore comes during the battle at the Department of Mysteries, when he's dueling against Voldemort. I think this scene, in the movies versus the books, fundamentally changes how we understand Dumbledore's power compared to Voldemort's. And it's, again, another example of how the films kind of diminish his character. So in the book, when Dumbledore arrives at the Ministry, he's a force of nature. He instantly and basically single-handedly subdues multiple Death Eaters without breaking a sweat. Like, the rest of the Order have been there dueling these other Death Eaters for a while, and the balance of the battle ebbs and flows in one direction or the other. And the Order and the Death Eaters are full of very powerful, very capable wizards and witches. And then Dumbledore just turns up and seemingly very easily rounds up the Death Eaters, ties them up, leaves them for the Ministry to go and find and arrest. It genuinely feels like it's child's play to Dumbledore. And the text is describing him as radiating power. And you can see why, as soon as he shows up, Harry is so relieved. He feels like the embodiment of hope itself. And putting him on that pedestal, showing us that power, shows us why Voldemort fears him, and shows us why losing him in the Half-Blood Prince is so diminishing to the good guys, to their efforts against Voldemort. And then when he duels Voldemort directly in the Department of Mysteries, there is kind of no question who has the upper hand. Here's how the book describes it. Dumbledore flicked his own wand. The force of the spell that emanated from it was such that Harry, though shielded by his golden guard, felt his hair stand on end as it passed. And this time, Voldemort was forced to conjure a shining silver shield out of thin air to deflect it. Throughout their duel, Dumbledore is calm and composed and in control. He even addresses Voldemort as Tom, reinforcing his authority over his former student. He's not just matching Voldemort spell for spell, he is dominating the fight while simultaneously protecting Harry. And when Voldemort asks, "You do not seek to kill me, Dumbledore," Dumbledore's response is chilling. "We both know there are other ways of destroying a man, Tom." And he says this while walking towards Voldemort, quote, as though he had not a fear in the world. And this fight scene establishes something crucial. Dumbledore is the only wizard Voldemort truly fears, and for good reason. He's not just powerful, he's more powerful than Voldemort. He's just trying to occupy Voldemort until the Ministry arrives and sees that he has in fact returned. Dumbledore is pulling his punches, but still comfortably handling this immensely powerful dark wizard. There are these moments in the Spider-Man comics where we realise Spider-Man pulls his punches 99% of the time, because he knows he'd just kill everybody if he punched them with all of his might. And this feels exactly like the same thing from Dumbledore. In the movie, The battle between Dumbledore and Voldemort feels far more evenly matched. Dumbledore in fact spends most of the fight on the defensive, barely keeping up with Voldemort's attacks. When Voldemort sends a massive fire snake at him, Dumbledore looks genuinely afraid. There is none of that calm confidence that we get in the book. Instead, film Dumbledore feels like he's fighting for his life, desperately trying to hold his ground and keep Harry protected against what is at least an opponent on the same level, if not superior. And this really changes the power dynamic between the two characters. In the books, we can understand why Voldemort never dared attack Hogwarts while Dumbledore was still alive. He just knew he couldn't win. But in the movies, it's far less clear. If they're so evenly matched in a one-on-one, why would Voldemort hesitate? Why wouldn't Voldemort enter Hogwarts at the end of The Half-Blood Prince, catching Dumbledore off guard and killing him himself? And I think this shift has massive implications for the story. Book Dumbledore's power gave readers a sense of security. As long as Dumbledore was around, Harry and Hogwarts were safe. And so when he dies in The Half-Blood Prince, that security is shattered. It makes his death all the more devastating, and it raises the stakes for the final book by 1,000 times. In the books, Dumbledore maintains this delicate balance between mentor and manipulator. He guides Harry while also setting him up for his eventual self-sacrifice. You know, he cares deeply for Harry, but he also views him as a piece in the larger game against Voldemort. And this creates a fascinating tension that culminates in their conversation at King's Cross, where Dumbledore finally confesses his mistakes and his shortcomings. "I cared about you too much," Dumbledore tells Harry. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan, more for your life than the lives that might be lost if the plan failed." And this admission feels authentic, because we've seen this conflict play out across 7 books. We've seen Dumbledore keeping secrets from Harry while simultaneously show him kindness and understanding. But film Dumbledore's relationship with Harry kind of lacks this nuance. I mean, we obviously keep coming back to it. The Goblet of Fire scene, when Harry's name comes out of the goblet. In the book, Dumbledore asks Harry calmly if he put his name in there, showing that even in this moment of crisis, he trusts Harry enough to give him a fair hearing. In the film, Dumbledore physically intimidates Harry, showing no trust and no respect whatsoever. Then there's that scene in the Half-Blood Prince film, where Dumbledore asks Harry about his relationship with Hermione.
But I notice you spend a great deal of time with Miss Granger. I can't help wondering if...
Oh, no. I mean, she's brilliant, and we're friends. But no.
Forgive me. I was merely being curious.
This scene doesn't exist in the books. And it shows a Dumbledore who's weirdly invasive about Harry's personal life, and also showing he's completely in the dark when it comes to Harry and his relationships. In the films, it's played for laughs, right? But it feels completely at odds with the dignified, respectful way that Book Dumbledore treats Harry. In fact, sticking with The Half-Blood Prince, one of the biggest criticisms the movie gets is that it cut out Voldemort's backstory. The book gives us loads of information about Voldemort's formative years, his motivations, and often when people criticize that, it's that it takes away from Voldemort's character. The way it tells these stories is through private lessons between Harry and Dumbledore, exploring past memories together, picking apart clues and suggestions, drawing conclusions. Dumbledore in these scenes is not only connecting with Harry one-on-one, which gives us a great glimpse into a new aspect of their relationship, but it also shows his respect for Harry, almost him seeing him as an equal in this fight against Voldemort. And so in these scenes, he's seemingly passing the torch, especially because later we find out that Dumbledore knows he's going to die soon because he's orchestrated it himself. And knowing that, he clues Harry up on the plan. So cutting these scenes from the film not only cuts the scenes that are important to Voldemort's character, but also hugely important to Harry and Dumbledore's relationship. And the pinnacle of their relationship in the books is the King's Cross scene in the Deathly Hallows, where Dumbledore finally explains everything to Harry with complete honesty. And it's this beautiful, emotional payoff to their very complicated relationship, especially in a book through which, without Dumbledore being around and without Dumbledore's guidance, Harry's faith in him has started to waver, and his trust in Dumbledore and his plan has really been called into question. In the film, we don't get those nuances of Harry questioning Dumbledore so much, and the scene at King's Cross is drastically shortened, losing so much of its emotional impact and failing to really resolve certain tensions between them. And I think by mishandling this crucial relationship, the film's missed an opportunity to show one of the most interesting dynamics in the series. The complicated bond between a flawed mentor and the boy he's trying simultaneously to protect and prepare for death. They turned a relationship defined by mutual respect, complicated by secrets, into something far more simplistic and ultimately less meaningful. So when we talk about the differences between book Dumbledore and movie Dumbledore, we cannot ignore the physical aspects of the character. How he looks, how he moves, how he carries himself. Book Dumbledore wears flamboyant, colourful robes. Purple, midnight blue, spangled with stars. His fashion sense is decidedly eccentric. And when he tries to dress as a muggle in The Half-Blood Prince, he wears a velvet suit in plum colour. He's someone who takes joy in expressing himself through his appearance. It's like an extension of the whimsical side of Dumbledore that we've mentioned plenty in this video. And I do think Richard Harris's version of Dumbledore captured some of this, with his flowing robes and his gentle demeanour, but he also portrayed Dumbledore as a bit more physically frail than he's described as being in the books. I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or if Harris was just a little bit older and a little bit more frail. You can't really imagine Richard Harris's Dumbledore dueling Voldemort or sprinting across the Hogwarts grounds. Gambon's Dumbledore had more physical energy, but it kind of lost the serenity and the flamboyance, right? His costumes became increasingly dull. Gone were the colourful, starry robes, replaced by boring greys and dull silvers. And his movements weren't those of someone who glides gracefully through a room, but of someone who's like constantly tense and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. There's a moment in The Prisoner of Azkaban where Gambon's Dumbledore absent-mindedly just pats Ron on his injured leg in the hospital wing. And it causes Ron pain, he grimaces, and it's played for laughs again, but it shows a Dumbledore who's careless with his physicality, who doesn't move with the deliberate grace of his book counterpart. And the way he uses his wand in the movies is different too. In the books, Dumbledore's wand work is described as being elegant and precise. When he duels, it's with minimal movement, but maximum effect. But in the films, particularly the later ones, when we see Dumbledore wave his wand, it's wild and it's huge, as if he's physically exerting himself to generate magical power. And the physical differences aren't just aesthetic, they fundamentally change how we perceive Dumbledore's character. Book Dumbledore is deliberate and always in control, and it sort of reinforces his wisdom. His colourful appearance matched by his whimsical personality. He's this agile, dexterous wizard who holds all of this power beneath this grandfatherly exterior. And so with the upcoming HBO series on the horizon, there's an opportunity to get Dumbledore right this time. To give us a Dumbledore who can face down Voldemort with calm confidence, who will happily offer a student a lemon sherbet. A Dumbledore who treats Harry with both the care of a guardian and the respect of a fellow warrior. A Dumbledore whose eyes really do twinkle beneath his half-moon spectacles. In the words of Dumbledore himself, it does not do to dwell on dreams. But I certainly am dwelling on the dream of a more book-accurate Dumbledore in the HBO series. And if you're interested on hearing my thoughts on the differences between Ron's character between the books and the movies, you can check this video out next, where I break down exactly that. Dumbledore says, it does not do to dwell on dweem. It does not do to dwell on dweem. Dumbledore says it does not do to dwell on dream. It does not dwell to do, as Dumbledore himself would say, it does not dwell to do on, it does not dwell to do.